welcome to the See You Try show. And I'm Karen Sims with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative. And once again, I just want to remind you the purpose of the show is to help educate folks about trauma and resiliency and also issues that impact the community. So I'm glad I have a wonderful panel today. So more than just one face. And so I'm going to let them do some introductions, but last month was Intellectual Disabilities and Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month. We missed the month, but I did not want the time to pass without sort of elevating this conversation because it is such an important issue. And I also think in the time where we're talking about equity and diversity, sometimes we miss people with developmental and intellectual disabilities from the conversation, and we don't really meaningfully think about accessibility in the ways that we need to. And I again, just wanted to take time and space. And so I will let my guests introduce themselves. So we have two people from Community Choices, and then we have somebody from DSC. So we have Vicki from DSC, and but I don't care who starts. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll go.
Should I go?
Okay, I'm Vicki Tolf, and I work at DSC. I've been here for about 21 years, and I'm the Director of Program Assurance. So I do lots of reports and basically, try to make sure that the reports are done for funders. Yeah.
Great. So Vicki, since you've been around for so long, I'm definitely going to circle back around because you've seen lots of evolution, right, over time. And it is almost a whole different industry, right?
Right. And I worked for 15 years before I came here at an agency a lot like DSC up in the Chicago suburbs.
Wow. So, okay.
I guess I can go next if you want. I'm Becca Obachowski. I'm the Executive Director at Community Choices. And I also know DSC service as well. I worked there for a long time before I came over here. I've been here for almost 5 years, but worked in the field for around 12 or 13. So
we've got to stop dating ourselves. So just say for a while, right?
For a while.
For a decade.
Thank you.
Sorry. I'm Hannah Sheets. I'm the Associate Director at Community Choices. I've been here for about 7 years, lived in Champaign-Urbana for 12. Before I worked at Community Choices, I worked in Champaign-Urbana Special Recreation, which is part of both park districts. So yeah, really enjoy being in Champaign-Urbana.
Okay. So probably the best, welcome, Hannah. So probably the best place to start, right? It's always like chicken or egg, right? Like to unpack some terms, right? Because I talked about intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. And I then want to have you talk about your organizations just so people are aware. Where do you think we should start? Should we talk about the terms and concepts so that people know and then they can understand your work, or should we talk about your work first? You give me a heads up.
I think it's great to sort of define terms. I think that there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding when it comes to different types of disabilities and diagnoses and what goes here and there and gets to be alphabet soup. So I think that seems like a great place to start.
So have at it. Where should, so what is an intellectual disability? What should people think about? What gets classified? What does that mean? Because again, 20 years ago, that wasn't language that was used. So for us old timers, so bring me up to speed.
So an intellectual disability, according to the state of Illinois, is someone with an IQ, a full scale IQ score of 70 or below. And so lots of times we do ask for that supporting documentation because the funders do require that we have proof of that diagnosis of an intellectual disability. So oftentimes we do ask for a psychological assessment just to verify that.
Gotcha. Of course, I have a bazillion questions, but I won't get to that, right? Because the IQ is such an interesting measure, right? Like in terms of trying to, when I think about cultural responsive, right? So people of color have historically been diagnosed as having lower IQs, but when I think about the service arena, right? Like it's interesting that it hasn't kind of matched.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things too, you know, like as Vicki said, looking at that IQ or the documentation related to that is something that I think service providers, like we are sort of beholden to through a lot of our funding structures. And even though the system and even the state funding systems will say like, no, we're really trying to be strengths focused. We're really trying to not look at things through like a deficit model of kind of, well, what's wrong with you? But like, you know, what are the things that we can support you to grow into? We end up still falling right back into that little box of IQ, which we know has like so many problems, and can be really just. I mean, I've even run into people who are like, I don't even want funding because I don't want to have to sort of go and get that label associated with myself. It's too painful. That's something we've certainly run into a few times. But that, yeah, I mean, that is still the definition that we work through. We sometimes call it different things over time. I mean, even in the time that I've been involved, it's been called a few different things. But intellectual and developmental disabilities, or like IDD, sometimes you'll see that in paperwork or on websites and stuff. So if people are trying to sort of decode the alphabet, that IDD is intellectual and developmental disabilities. That's kind of the world that we live in. And I don't know, other, you know, intellectual disability is really general. Sometimes that's the only diagnosis that somebody that we work with might have. Sometimes they'll also have an additional diagnosis of like of an autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome. Cerebral palsy can also be can have an intellectual disability associated with it, or it doesn't necessarily. But that developmental disability definition generally means that there has been some abnormality, I guess, associated with an individual's brain development before the age of 22. That age of 22 comes up a lot, excuse me, in kind of the bureaucratic side of what we do, in terms of like when these sort of diagnosis points or transition points happen.
Wow, that's helpful. I did not realize the 22 was the issue. And I think you teased apart, and I don't know if Hannah, you have anything to chime in, but you teased apart like there's intellectual disabilities. And then you said there are this other kind of category called developmental disabilities. And those are issues and diagnoses like that happen to your development before you kind of reached adulthood. And right, like from the brain development, I guess they're thinking like 22 for women, prefrontal cortex executive functioning, like any interruptions of that development. Am I right? Or like, is that what you guys hypothesize is? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So, and then I want to talk about your work then. I guess if I'm a mom or a dad or a kiddo or a young adult sitting at home listening to this conversation, and I'm wondering, could this be me? Or could I need help or get support? How does that happen? Like, walk me through, like, what happens? Yeah, talk me through what would happen if I think that could be someone in my family, or it could be me. What do I do?
Usually it just starts with a phone conversation. If this is how DSC would do it, I don't know how Community Choices does it, but I get a lot of phone calls every day from community members looking for lots of different resources. And so they might start out with just asking, you know, what services we provide, and then whether or not someone would qualify. And we're lucky in the Champaign County area that there are lots of other resources too. So if they don't qualify for Community Choices or for DSC services, there are other resources, you know, that we of course refer them to. But yeah, unfortunately, and I hate when I do this, but I do it to save the family time, is one of the first conversations I usually have is whether or not they qualify.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people have heard about the PUNS list.
Mhm. Probably not. So we'll have to pick that.
It's an acronym. It's PUNS, Prioritization of Urgency of Need of Services. So in this county, the Regional Planning Commission is the agency that assists people on seeing if they qualify for PUNS. And at least at DSC, you have to qualify for that list to be able to receive services. So that's usually the first part of the conversation before we even really get into too many services. I don't know if that's what you guys do, Hannah, or?
That is typically what we do as well. So helping folks figure out who they need to talk to about qualifying for services, and then getting them connected with regional planning, like Vicki said. The other part of the conversation, I'm sure Vicki does this as well, is if you don't qualify for services, if you don't qualify for the PUNS list, it's helping people figure out then where can you go? What do you qualify for? And like, Becca and Vicki have already said, like, it tends to be a conversation of like, it sounds, it's not a good system, but it's like, what are you disabled enough to qualify for? And it is, that's probably the, just the disheartening part of our jobs.
Right. It is.
Mm-hmm.
When someone's like, but they really could use your services. That is the hard part.
Yeah, I think sometimes the most difficult kind of conversations or sort of instances that we run into are these times when we like the funding systems and these eligibility sort of formats often use this IQ at this like 70 cutoff. It's the people who maybe have an IQ of 75 or 78 who really need like can do many things, right? Have many can get along in the world quite well in many ways, likely. But there might be a few really key areas where they, with even just a little bit of support, might be able to live a whole sort of like different type of experience from day to day. Like maybe that's help getting a job and just like that little extra bit of time that you might put in to help that person learn the skills necessary to make sure that all the pieces that they're doing their job right and that they're getting there on time and figuring out the bus and getting the deposit right, like all of these like little pieces that you really need a lot of skills for. It's oftentimes those people that are right above that cutoff where it is hard for us as organizations to get the funding to support those people. But like I'm sure all of us here know, those can be really tough situations to support people with. And we do always try to find other ways that people can get support. Both DSC and Community Choices, we do focus on folks with that intellectual developmental disability, but locally there's other organizations too, like Department of Rehab Services, where people with sort of a broader range of diagnoses or types of disabilities are able to access some services, and those, they do a lot of employment supports there, and they also do like home services. So if people need like a PA to come in, they can help with that sometimes too. So there are a few other options, but we live in this very specific box related to like what type of supports we're able to offer and to who.
And I don't want to discourage, if you have an IQ above 70, or maybe your IQ is 80, but you have autism or epilepsy, if it causes a significant significant barrier to your life skills, I still encourage them to contact Regional Planning Commission just to make sure, because they do have kind of the final say. And if someone has deficits in, I think, 3 of the 6 living skill areas that they look at, they might qualify anyway. That's a really good point, Vicki. I don't say that to dissuade everybody. It just
yeah, that's where it just gets complicated.
Yes.
And just maybe one other quick word about the puns list, because I think that this is something that gets really confusing for folks. And honestly, that gets really confusing for folks specifically in Champaign County, is the puns list is like the waiting list. When people talk about the waiting list for services in Illinois, what they're talking about is the puns list.
Okay.
And the thing they're waiting for is funding through Medicaid, actually.
Ah,
It's a way that Medicaid pays for services that aren't specifically like medication or getting to the doctor, but are these, they call them home and community-based services. And so that might be, might be a group home, it might be employment support, it might be having just like a support worker who can help you get to the grocery store. And so, but being on that list, they essentially pre-screen people who will qualify. And so that basically kind of gives you entry into some services locally, even though you don't necessarily have that state funding yet. And so we're really lucky in Champaign County to have funding through the Developmental Disabilities Board, which is it's through tax levies, property taxes, and it helps pay for services for folks with disabilities if they live in Champaign County. And so there's actually a ton of services that you can get here that other people who maybe live somewhere else wouldn't necessarily have the same access to. And so we really encourage people, even if they're like, well, I'll have to wait a really long time, there's such a waiting list, like, no, there's actually a lot you can do in the meantime. So please reach out to us, reach out to DSC, reach out to regional planning. And I think if you come to any of those places, we will get you to where you need to go.
okay.
So, but
That is very helpful. Can I actually, so I want to talk about the kinds of services that might be offered, but I also imagine there were two things that I was struck with, or maybe even a little confused about. Like, you don't have to have both disabilities, right? So I want to make sure we articulate, like, you could have an intellectual disability or a developmental disability, or you could have both and, but either or would qualify. Am I reading that right? I guess because we've been talking about them sort of interconnected, but they don't have to be, right? Like, you don't have to.
yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. I want to be sure I'm right. All right.
Either or, one or the other. I mean, occasionally, occasionally that's not true. There's always exceptions to the rule, but most folks will be either or.
Okay, and then just a step that precedes, and again, I want to make sure that I'm clear, and also so that the audience is clear. Probably need to sort of be working with a doctor or some medical provider or some mental health provider or a range of folks. Like, so ideally, like, somebody in my life before I get to adulthood probably would have had eyes upon me. And I'm imagining there's scenarios where that hasn't happened, where like maybe mom or dad was pretty insulated, and then one of those leave or move or die or something happens, and then all of a sudden folks emerge in the system. But ideally, you're hoping that schools or primary care providers or doctors would have seen some of this before they show up into adulthood. Is that kind of how that works?
Yes, a lot of our referrals come from schools or families themselves,
Okay.
Especially with an autism diagnosis. If
Ah,
Yeah.
But yeah.
so to highlight that. All right. So like, I think that I was like, I want to make sure like I broke that down. And so that if people are sitting and going, well, I don't have both, does that qualify me? And just to reiterate that you said an autism diagnosis could make you eligible for services and support. So again, with, just the sheer number of folks with, who have been impacted by autism, it's helpful to say that out loud.
Yeah.
So that being said, what do they get? Like, so I call you up and I say, hey, I think this could be helpful for me. Who should be calling, and what can you help out with?
Do you want to go, Vicki? Or we can start, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Community Choices and Developmental Services Center, I mean, we offer some similar programs, but some are a little bit different. But at DSC, so we have what we call residential services. That could be a group home. which is generally funded by the state of Illinois, or it could be our community living program, which consists of supporting individuals who live in our supported apartment building that we have, or they live in their own home or apartment. So the community living program is the staff just provides services that the individual wants help with.
Okay.
So they live in their own apartment. Let's say they're fine doing their grocery shopping, they're fine cooking, but maybe they need help. They just need someone to go with them to the doctor to make sure they understand everything the doctor says. Or maybe they need someone to help them fill up their medication box and make sure that they're doing that correctly. Maybe they need someone to just kind of oversee their budgeting and making sure their bills get paid. So it's really an individualized program. And I think, the same is true for Community Choices program, which is similar. The group home's a little different. That's someone who needs 24-hour supervision. And so then, of course, the services they receive, they need more support. So there's that piece. And then we do have day program, and that consists of a variety of services depending upon, once again, the need of the individual. So if the individual needs personal care support, that service looks a little bit different than someone who is gonna just do day program in the community and meet us for different things during the day. And then we also provide employment services. And so that's someone who wants to get a job in the community. And, starting with the discovery process, trying to figure out what type of job they even want, and then maybe help building their resume and interviewing, and then of course providing job coaching while they learn that new job.
Wow.
DSC also has services for children 0 to 5. So we also have that part too.
Wow. So some housing supports. It seems like some individualized services and supports, like everything's done through an individualized plan. It seems like there are some programs around skill building and capacity building, and perhaps some socialization activities. And then there's the 0 to 5 early childhood developmental supports that you offer.
Correct.
All right. I think, all right. Okay. So Community Choices, who wants to go?
Do you want to talk, Hannah? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Sure. That's no problem. So Community Choices, like Vicki said, we have some similar services to DSC. So like we both offer employment services, starting with helping folks, finding jobs in the communities, doing the discovery process, figuring out like what type of job would fit folks, and trying to have that be a very personalized process. So that's something that we both do. So at Community Choices, we do provide community living support, but we don't own our own property, so we don't provide group homes for folks. We support folks who are maybe looking to move out of their family house for the first time. So maybe want to move into an apartment on their own, or an apartment with friends, or a house with friends, and helping people figure out like what kind of support they might need just for a short period of time as they adjust to that, or for a more sustained period of time. And then what that looks like from us, and then what that looks like from their natural support. So helping them figure out who is already in their life that can support them with that. Because what we're finding is we want people to have, more natural supports in their life. Those are the lasting things. Those are the relationships that, that stay, and fewer services from us when possible. Like, because, heaven forbid, like if we had to shut down, what would happen, right? We want people to have those things in place. So we have community living, and then we also have what we call our Connect department, where we really work with folks to connect to their community and connect to other people and to figure out what the things are that they enjoy, what brings them, what their passions are, what brings them happiness, but also how they want to contribute to our community here in Champaign-Urbana. I think so often people think of folks with IDD as people who need services, right? Or who need supported, which we all do. We all need supported at different times, but they don't ever think of people with intellectual disabilities as maybe contributors to our community. So, serving on committees, providing, participating in different community events that are happening, participating in some of the other community organizations that are going on. And so helping people make those connections and to what they're passionate about and the people in the community, and build those relationships so that it's not just us, as service providers, but it's also the community in general. So.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
No, go Becca.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, that's like, those are, I think a lot of times, how to get there can be it looks really different for different people. And so we try, like when we talk about like being involved in the community and contributing and figuring out what you're interested in and passionate in, like what that service actually looks like is like just having a lot of different opportunities to try things. And I think when it comes to folks with intellectual or developmental disabilities, I think one of the most common kind of like barriers with all of the programs that like both of our organizations offer is that people just haven't had the chance to sort of figure out like, well, what does it look like to live on your own? What is there to do, and which ones of those things do I like? And so I think to a great degree, a lot of what we do, and I know what DSC does, is give people those chances to be like, hey, why don't you try this on for a day and see if it feels great or if it feels terrible. And if you hate it, don't do it again. And if you like it, we'll hopefully be here to be able to help you sort of, lean into that and be more involved.
Sounds wonderful. So I guess I have two questions, sort of. One of them, I think I just heard a PSA, right, by Holly Robinson Peete, right, who talked about the employment issues. And she said, fewer than only about 20% of folks with intellectual or developmental disabilities are employed, but workplaces that hire folks report so much better, like workplace satisfaction. It changes culture and climate. It's a good thing. And I wonder, if there's if that's your lived experience, that sometimes lots of people want to work and trying to find employers to understand the benefits might be sort of this ongoing tension. But when I heard those stats, I was like, wow, that seems like a really small number. And when she touted the benefits, I was like, it seems like a no-brainer that of course you would want, if it benefits your organization, of course you would want to hire. So do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you look at the statistics, they're terrible. But that, I think I think we've all found that to be really true, that employers, businesses, organizations that really look to being inclusive in their hiring, they tend to come back and want to do it more and more and be like, are you working with anybody else? I have this kind of position. Is there anybody that who would be a good fit? And so, but I think folks, there's just a lot of people just have a different sort of mindset about it. Kind of like you were saying, Hannah, like people don't think of folks with disabilities as contributing or being able to work when actually the exact opposite is true. People tend to be extremely motivated to work and really excited and value their employers and really want to do a good job. And I think it is a question of just some of that education. So Community Choices in DSC, we actually have a collaborative grant and project that I think this is going on, is it the 6th year, Vicki? Do you remember? I was trying to count back.
I know, I didn't look it up, but it
might be 7.
It might be.
But it's called LEAP, which is Leaders in Employing All People. And it's like an education and capacity building project where we actually go out and train businesses and sort of help them understand some of the benefits of having inclusive hiring practices and bringing on employees who have intellectual or developmental disabilities or any type of disability, really. and just kind of like what that might look like, and trying to sort of talk about some of those things that people like. I think when you get into disability with employers, there's often this like big elephant in the room where it's like, we think it's going to be expensive and terrible and we can't possibly make it work. And so just opening up a space where we can have that conversation, address some of those things head on, let employers have the opportunity to ask those questions that maybe they've been like thinking about but haven't felt comfortable with. We both have a sort of a LEAP coordinator that go and do those trainings, and we do them virtually now, like we do most things, but that they can kind of give, they have a lot of like lived experience doing things like job coaching and working with employers and working with community building and business outreach and that sort of thing. And so they can be really great resources for businesses, both within that initial training, but also, you know, we often will have businesses kind of come back to us and be like, hey, we have this thing come up. Do you have any resources? So we really look to be supportive kind of on an ongoing basis with those businesses for sure.
Wow. So this is great. I feel like it would be a good time to sort of, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up questions around diversity and stigma. So, right. So those are the two things that I think sort of are lingering. They're not intersecting, but sometimes intersecting. So, maybe we should start easy, right, with stigma, because that was sort of where we were parenthetically. And what are some of the misconceptions or stigmas that maybe stop people from accessing services or participating? What gets in the way of people seeking help?
That's a great question.
So you mean what gets in the way of people seeking services or employing people?
Or no, well, both, right? Like what gets in the way? What kind of stigmas get in the way of both help seeking or employment? Like what kind of stigmas, what do you think people are getting wrong?
I think some people, you know, Becca touched upon it earlier, that they don't want for people to think that they need help. They want to do it on their own, and they don't want to be considered you know, someone who needs that much help. And so we do try to stress that, hey, you know, this could be very short term. You know, the whole point of both of our programs is to teach the individual, and hopefully they'll be independent someday and they won't need anybody anymore except for maybe a check-in. So I think that's one of the things that keeps people from reaching out.
Yeah, I think one of the other things too, I mean, just like touching on that, is that I think people sometimes don't understand what disability services look like. I mean, I think when they think of it, they maybe think of really institutional settings and think like, that's not me, that's not what I need. When really, like, unfortunately, that does still exist, and that's something we need to address. But that is not what the majority of services look like, and that's certainly not what the majority of services look like here in this community, especially. I think in the other pieces, then the people who are looking for support, it can be very disheartening when you read the news about like how long people are waiting for services, you know, the lack of options, the staffing crisis. You know, there's a lot of very distressing or very gloomy kind of news about what developmental disability services look like. That can be like, well, fine, if I'm just going to have to wait, I'm just going to do it on my own. I think that can be a piece of it too.
Wow. Hannah, do you have any, like, I saw you kind of nodding, so I was wondering what was kind of going through your head. Anything?
Well, I was just to kind of piggyback off of what Becca said. I think understanding that, you know, wait lists for services can be really long, or wait lists for things like the PUNS list can be very long. But we are, like, you know, we've said we are very lucky here in Champaign County that our Developmental Disability Board and Mental Health Board are able to give grants to DSC and Community Choices, so we can still work with folks. And some of that work, you know, some of what we provide to them is at no cost to them through these grants. And so I think that's something that people don't always understand. They think if they don't have state funding, then there's nothing available to them, and that's not necessarily true. And so, and then there's also these other services that, you know, that I know DSC also provides, but I know more obviously about what we do at Community Choices, but just like talking with families about, okay, so if you're waiting for this state funding, here's some of the things that you can do, within your life right now. Here's some things that can maybe help, you as parents to get more of what you need, and you as a young adult with a disability to get more of what you need. And so I don't think people know that services like that exist, where you can just sit down and talk with us, and we'll help you, really help you try to figure some things out, and we'll try to help you piece things together.
And I was just thinking, you guys are in sort of a catch-22, because on one end, right, we're having this conversation, and when I think about folks that I know and in the community, there is the need for outreach and engagement for people to understand how to navigate the service array and and you're also like, and the reality is, we want you to know about it, but also there's some structural barriers that it may be a while. And so we kind of want, and then that's sort of like the chicken, right? So outreach and engagement, when you're like, it could take a minute, or it could take a minute to get this, but that's a hard communication. And I can imagine that feels like a little bit of a bind.
Right. And that is the hard part of it, I think, is that depending upon what services you need, and depending upon, what situation DSC is in at the moment, it does make a difference. If you need, more services, more, even if you need one-on-one or one-on-two, as far as staff to, for a ratio, that's difficult to provide when we're going through, a pandemic.
Yeah. And I can imagine then that those turn into, right, then we're going to segue to issues of equity, because if you know it, if you are part of a community or family or a group that's already engaged and involved and know how to navigate, they're sharing information, they're sharing resources, you know what to find. If you haven't, you're new to that community, you're not involved in a parent network or group or whatever, and then you don't know. And so the people who know continue to access, and all the folks on the front, and you can't just be like, well, no, because you don't get a chance to be prioritized. And so that's how you set up these, right? And that's how it reinforces some disproportionality, because it's we already are full with the people who know how to get here. And then we're waiting, new people who are coming to the table are like, what about us? And you're like, well, we're waiting for you, but how do you build capacity?
Yeah, I think that is a huge issue when it comes to disability services, because the system is so convoluted and so complicated, and it really favors the people who have the time and the resources to dig in and figure out how it works, and figure out how to talk to the right person in the right way and ask for the right things. And for other people who have less resources to devote to that, it's exhausting and overwhelming, and it's really easy to just be like I'm surviving right now, and so I'm going to keep surviving, and I don't have anything left to give to this. And so, spending time, and I think it's hard too, because it's well, how do you help people in those positions kind of understand that system if they're in such a place where it's really hard to take the time to learn it, because it doesn't stop being complicated. So I think the more we can, right, the more we can do to sort of help to demystify some of these things, even just talking about the definitions and doing things like this. I certainly I hope that those things help, and any amount of education or information or easy to follow, I can look at this one piece of paper and get a sense of what the steps are in this program or in this system. I think those things can really sort of open doors for families and for individuals that are trying to access services. And I'm never going to read the 12 links on the DHS web page. I don't even want to read those things. Please, give it to me in 6 bullet points. I don't know. Those are things we think about a lot when we're trying to talk about how do we offer services and explain how they work.
And we try to link some of those families that are struggling to maybe other families, other parents who do know the ins and outs. And, maybe they really relate better to them too, and just trying to, give examples. Well, here's what we did. Start here, maybe go there next, just kind of to help guide someone that's struggling through that. Because like Becca said, it can be complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think those parent support networks and there's we have a great CU Able is a Facebook group that's a local group. It's focused on for parents of folks with disabilities. It tends to skew a little bit younger, but not entirely. For mostly for kids that are still in the schools. But I see all sorts of different questions on there, and it's a great. I mean, I see people asking all sorts of things and getting information, even if you don't like engage or sort of ask questions to it, just even like reading through, if you're scrolling, it can be really helpful. We do like quarterly, we call them co-op meetings. So we're run as a human services co-op where we try to encourage families to come. We have a family support group, which usually is just like families just sort of like getting to know each other and knowing that there's some other people that have some similar shared experiences, like you said, Becky.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about, particularly for young adults, not that I'm not concerned about all you folks, but I'm particularly concerned about young adults of color. Are there like support groups and resources, for folks who might present, right, like might have intellectual or developmental disabilities? Are there resources? Because I understand like there are different cultural issues that definitely manifest themselves. So are there stuff that's unique? Are you aware or
I
fantasizing and dreaming?
I think that would be wonderful. I don't know that there is anything that exists locally that's specifically focused for folks with disabilities who are also a person of color. But yeah, I think that could be really helpful. And certainly I think there's a lot of space for those type of services and supports and outreach to grow within this whole service system. Absolutely.
And we just try to make sure that our outreach is to, if there's a particular community, make sure there's outreach there. And also just making sure that other providers and agencies of other services are aware of what Community Choices and DSC does so that they can help spread that word. That maybe they're there helping with another community service and see that there might be another need. And if they know about the services that both of our agency provides, then they can help spread that word. And also sometimes that referral is more accepting than, expecting someone just to call out of the blue and try to find out what DSC is about.
Well, I know when I have worked with adolescents, and one of the things I was committed to is making sure that as a part of the transition planning, particularly when I was working with adolescents who had some behavioral issues, to also make sure that people did not forget their intellectual or developmental disability needs, and making sure that on those transition plans that they were, getting them on the PUNS list and not just focusing on the mental health side, because that was often, and again, not poo-pooing schools, but I just found that youth of color with intellectual and developmental disabilities weren't necessarily being connected to those supportive resources. And that was one of the other questions I had for you, Vicki. When I was doing that children's work, I know with the 0 to 5 window, African-American youth and Latino youth, Latinx youth tend to be misdiagnosed or not diagnosed with autism. We tend to be missed in that window. And if you weren't caught then it's hard in school, right? Like you could be in like 5th or 6th grade before someone like recognizes or sees you because of stigma, because of cultural issues. Has that improved? I'm hoping.
I really think it has. I mean, I don't have it,
No, I know you don't have to hard data, but I
do know that family development, our family development program, is they really do a great job of reaching out and making sure that they are also involved in any daycare centers who might see those kids, making sure doctors are aware of what services we have. One thing that I have seen in Champaign County is a great collaboration of the providers for early intervention. And they really do team and work out and, work together in making sure that a lot of the families are aware of the services out there.
Yeah, I think one of the things too that I've noticed a lot, and I had spent some time working in the schools a few years back. I think the other thing that happens too is that like I'm of the opinion like support is good. We all need support, and that there's nothing wrong with that. And like honestly, like we should throw a parade when people are like, hey, I need help, like because that's really hard to do. But at the same time, having labels associated with you, especially in young childhood, as you come up through school, it can sometimes reduce the number of opportunities that you have. And so it's a really delicate balance too, because having spent some time within the school system, know that young kids who are Black and African American, Latinx, and we've had such a diverse school system here locally, that a lot of times those kids will get diagnosed or sort of put into special ed classes sometimes when maybe they need some language support or other types of things. So it's such a complicated issue, and while again I think it's great when people when kids get support and when adults get support that they need and that they're asking for. I know that sometimes it reduces the number of opportunities that kids can get in school, and again, not to say anything against the school system, I think this is something that happens across the country. But being able to identify folks and give them support when they're young, I think is really important, because it's you can kind of address it right when it emerges.
So that's a perfect another transition, because I wanted to talk about barriers and challenges, and I'm just going to add my little commercial. My concern is always around what you do with it. So what my concern was that kids were being identified in a certain way. And unfortunately, because of the politics of labeling, that sometimes it was so much easier to identify a behavioral need rather than a developmental or a mental health need. And that was, so some of the behaviors, right? So if I'm reacting because I'm on the autism spectrum, and no one identifies that, but they say that I am acting out or misbehaving, and the supports I'm getting are punitive, not corrective or supportive, it creates this, it does set up a pathway, but unfortunately I was seeing kids who were being identified. It wasn't like they weren't being identified, but what they were being identified for was frequently the thing that was, in some ways, I mean, I work with a couple of adolescents who had clear developmental disability needs, who had been labeled behavioral problems, their whole academic pathway. And no one ever looked at what, and even though, again, there were IQs and all those other things that would support, they were just sort of being treated as, bad kids. And I was wow, you think, and if mom had more tools and resources and people had better understanding, right? If they had how different those developmental pathways and trajectories would have been, rather than in a couple cases, folks ended up in the criminal justice system because they never, people just didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's kids, it's you're really struggling with math. It's okay, let's address that. Let's not address the problem, the fact that you're struggling. And I think the same thing comes when you're supporting adults in all sorts of different situations. It's not being able to communicate what you need or what's happening with you, or not being able to kind of to as easily do the thing that you want. Oftentimes it'll come out in some other area. And I think that's something that we all think about a lot when we're providing support is okay, well, what is the challenge that sort of we're trying to address today? What are some of those underlying causes? What are some of the underlying needs that maybe aren't being met, that are making you have a really hard time at your job? It's a lot of times it can be a little bit of a is kind of a unlocking the puzzle of like, what, and sometimes, you'll end up finding the thing like, wow, this, like, I never would have guessed that this was the piece that we really needed to be spending some time with. That was gonna like, okay, it's not actually that you don't like the job, it's that you really need new shoes or
Right. Well, and we always say behavior is communication. And so trying to figure out what is that behavior communicating? And like Becca said, it could be that their feet hurt, they need new shoes. I mean, it could be as simple as that, but trying to figure that out sometimes is difficult, and with children too.
Yeah, I love that. So I was going to ask you to talk about challenges. I feel like we've gotten some of those challenges out, right? Like, so if there's anything, so I hear challenges definitely around funding, definitely around access, definitely around understanding, understanding on so many different levels, like community-wide understanding, employers, families, young, right? Like lots of understanding. Are there other challenges that we missed? Because if you feel like we've got them, then I will shift gears and try to end up, because you said one of the things that we try to do is be really strength-based. So I would want to make sure that we maybe end this conversation on a high note, knowing that we could have this other conversation, because I know we didn't talk about trauma, we didn't talk about a whole bunch of other things that were relevant. So maybe we should, maybe when things open up or some new event, we should have part 2 of this conversation so we could go. But what would you say in terms of words of encouragement or inspiration, or what else should you add, right? Like as we sort of round this part of the conversation up?
I think what I would say to families and people with, any disability is to keep trying to get what you want and speak up, speak out. That, yeah, maybe the system is this certain way, but if you believe that you need something different or that your child needs something different, keep fighting for that and just keep looking, keep asking questions, keep questioning, and keep asking the questions and trying to get your answers.
I love that. And I also heard you say, and if you call DSC, you might be able to connect with another parent or other places. We can help empower you and learn the skills. And I thought that was, first of all, I didn't know that, but that's really inspirational that, sometimes you can just help people build their social connections and networks.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add just a bit about, so if you're a teenager or a younger person who does have an intellectual disability or developmental disability, one of the things that Community Choices has been doing is partnering with the CU one-to-one mentoring program, which has gotten, it's been a little hard during the pandemic and having to do things virtually. But so working with them to match up mentors who have intellectual disabilities with students who have intellectual disabilities, because it's, none of us have been through some of those same experiences. And so being able to talk to an adult who remembers what it was like to not have maybe their classmates understand them or not communicate in the same way that, the other kids around them were, or that the teacher was expecting. And then being able to see a successful adult who is, I grew up with autism and now I work here and I have these, these friends, or I don't need friends because that's not my thing, but I'm successful and I'm doing these cool things. It's really great. So if we're talking about positives, it's knowing that like, okay, like there can come a time where I can do things that my peers are doing. I can have a job. I can, have a happy life that I am pleased with. So, so just knowing that there are people out there who have been through that.
And would you argue, I promise Becca I'm going to come, but
Oh, no, you're
Hannah,
fine.
would you argue that that would be also stigma busting? Because I know young adults who have fears about that. I know families who believe, right, a diagnosis is limiting and it means that, you know, your life will be thwarted in some way. And you're like, hey, let me tell you, let me model this program.
It's stigma busting, you know, in both ways. It's stigma busting for the youth, right, who like, nope, things can work out, but it's also then for maybe, you know, parents or adults, peers of the mentor who don't understand that, like, oh, this person can, you know, be a coach, be a leader, be a mentor to somebody and help them grow. So it's, I don't know. Yeah. So it's definitely stigma busting. It's cool.
Very cool. Yeah. Thanks. I'm inspired. Because, you know, I believe, right, trauma informed is promoting empowerment strategies, because I could tell you about stuff all day long, but giving you opportunities to lead is the key.
Yeah, I guess I really just kind of piggybacking off of that. I think one of the things when I think about stigma busting and helping people shift their mindsets is just like how important it can be for, you know, young people who have disabilities and families of people who have disabilities. Like if you go to a restaurant and your server is somebody who maybe appears to have a disability, like what does that say? What is that communicating to that person? What is that communicating to everybody else that's in that environment? It's saying like, hey, this person has something to contribute. This person is, you know, out here, you know, like working hard and doing the same stuff that everybody does in order to live a full life. And so, you know, it sucks that it's kind of on every person, but also like every person who's out there doing that stuff and figuring out what it is they're interested in and being part of it, like they're sending a message to everybody else involved that they have every right to be there and that they have something to offer, and that their contribution and their sort of role in whatever sort of that situation that they're in is really valuable and really helps other people sort of realize like, hey, that could be me too. And so I think with everything that we're doing, like every person who's like out there being like, hey, I want my own apartment, and then figuring out how to make that happen, and I want a job, or I want to be involved in this type of group, or learn about this type of, you know, sport or activity or whatever the things are that people do for fun. I think that you know, that is in itself, compared to how things have been, like that is an amazing sort of communication to the world about, you know, what people with disabilities, how they're just really the same as everybody else. Like, and so, you know, that's one of the things I like to sort of encourage people to sort of notice and think about for themselves.
Well, that is super inspiring. And I want to do one more pitch. So if I'm an employer and I'm sitting on my couch and I'm stumbling upon public access, and you're like, hey, the name of that program was the LEAD program or the LEAD program?
LEAP.
LEAP. Okay, it was the LEAP program. And I could reach out and say, hey, I would like to sort of offer opportunities or have you come out and do some training. And that you would encourage that broad and deep, because it seems like there would not be limitations to the kind of employment experiences that you want to open up the world of experiences. And I know, right, like your employment support, you walk alongside if people need it, like you could scaffold support, like a lot of things. It's not all the burden isn't completely always on the employer, that you offer a lot of help to make sure that that's a success.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, it has been wonderful. Like I told you, it would go quickly. It has been wonderful. So I just want to remind folks that we had Vicki from DSC, and we had Becca and Hannah from Community Choices, and they say, don't worry about trying to navigate things in advance. Call, reach out. There's lots of information that is accessible and user-friendly. Right, Vicki said phone call happens all the time. Ask, and if they're not the point of entry, there are local resources that can support some work. They will make sure that you can get to what you need. And like everything, if you're a mom on the couch, I would say like get involved earlier, mom or dad on the couch, get involved earlier. Don't wait until like you become, unfortunately, I know families who wait till they're disabled or something happens. Like instead you say, get involved now. If you're like, I don't want to wait on a waiting list, you're waiting regardless. So you better be on a waiting list. Time's still going by. But I want people to know what a valuable resource is. And I so appreciate you for doing such great work. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen.